Hello, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to this press conference. We'll be talking about the tobacco industry and its fourth regional index on the interference by the tobacco industry 2025. Now, we're just giving it a minute as we make sure all participants connect. Thank you so much for being here with us at this journey, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. While we wait, I just wanted to give you a few housekeeping announcements. So this press conference will have people from Brazil, Ecuador, Guatemala, Panama, and Mexico. Once we are done with the press conference, any remaining questions will be answered afterwards. You can submit your questions in the chat box, and we've already actually taken down your questions and your email addresses. We'll be answering those as soon as we can. So we're going to be answering some questions from the press conference, especially pertaining to the document about the index. This was created by Corporate Accountability along with the Global Center for Good Governance in Tobacco Control. Now, we have simultaneous translation available into Portuguese and English. So if you'd like to use that, feel free to choose the right audio channel by clicking on the interpretation button. It's a globe icon on the lower part of your screen, and then you can choose your preferred audio channel. Please submit your questions via the chat box, and we'll be monitoring that as we go along. Once we're done with the press conference, we will continue to answer them by email. So those were our housekeeping announcements. Most people have already connected, so I believe we can get started formally with our press conference. Can we confirm whether we're ready to start? Yep, we're all good, Daniel. Great, let's get started. Pleasure to be here. My name is Daniel Dorado. I'm a director here at Corporate Accountability, working with tobacco control. It's great to have so many of you with us today, representatives and officials from Brazil, Ecuador, Guatemala, Panama, and Mexico. Thank you so much for accepting the invitation to be here at the fourth regional index on the interference of the tobacco industry 2025 for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have simultaneous translation available between Portuguese, English, and Spanish. So if you'd like, make sure you choose your preferred audio channel. This press conference is not going to be entertaining any questions. So if you'd like to ask any questions during the presentations, make sure to submit them in the chat box, or you can send them in by email. You can use the email addresses that you've seen in the registration links, and we can also actually provide the answers via the focal points, so the focal people who have been invited from the different countries. The format for this press conference will be in two parts, actually. The first part will be conducted by Laura Salgado. She's our colleague from the Global Center for Good Governance. She will be delivering the overall presentation on the results of the fourth regional interference index. After that, we'll move on to our second part of today's event. This is going to be a discussion panel involving all of the officials representing the different countries who have accepted our invitation to be here today. So that said, I'd like to say that it's an honor and a source of great joy to welcome Laura Salgado. So Laura, please switch on your camera. She is the head of campaigns and partnerships at the Global Center for Good Governance in Tobacco Control. Her collaboration has been strategic in putting together this document, and I wanted to give her the floor, but before I do, I wanted to thank her for her contribution, for her participation, and also my other colleagues, Daniela Valdivieso and Jaime Arcila, who were co-authors to this document. Without the support of these three individuals, in addition to all of you guys here and these organizations, Corporate Accountability and the Global Center for Good Governance in Tobacco Control and Bloomberg Philanthropies, this project would never have gotten off the ground. So thank you. None of these organizations have any conflicts of interest when it comes to the tobacco industry. We wanted to put that out there up front. So that said, Laura, welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about the findings of this report? Hello. Hello, Daniel. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here talking about some of our key findings in the 2025 index. I'm also grateful to all the contributors who have participated in this process. So the regional index on the interference of the tobacco industry spans from 2023 to 2025, and it looks into how governments are protecting their policies from the commercial interests of the industry. As mentioned in Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention of the WHO for Tobacco Control. And we're also promoting civil society collaboration to make sure these policies are further strengthened. Now, generally speaking, the tobacco industry across the board has been stepping up its operations. They're taking advantage of all the gaps that they find. And government responses are often not enough to contend with that. This is why we've mentioned, well, we're showing that the scores are actually lower. This shows that the interference from the industry has actually gone up. This is based on a survey that's conducted by civil society based on the 5.3 guidelines, which is composed of 7 indicators, 54 recommendations in total. This survey is based on these guidelines and directives that were approved 17 years ago. We in civil society want to find out the level to which the governments are putting these measures into place. This is also a useful tool for governments to determine what the vulnerable areas are so that they can further strengthen their measures whenever necessary. This instrument measures these 7 areas or dimensions which span the industry's interference in public policy making, as well as interference and conflicts of interest. And all of this draws on public information. This is valid from April 2023 to March 2025. That's the time period for this particular work. Now, things have been changing. The industry is dynamic and it's further intensifying its own strategies. We'll be discussing this during the panel, by the way. We'll be discussing how these operations are taking place in different countries. About this index report, we have the scores for the different countries as well as a regional score, and this shows just how severe, how serious these cases have been over the last 2 years. If you see lower scores, this means that there's a greater degree of protection of public policies against industry interference in the country in question. The results for 2025 show that no country is fully free from interference by the tobacco industry in our region. In fact, in some cases, that level of interference has gone up. Only 7 countries have seen an actual improvement. Mexico is pretty much at the forefront here with the least amount of interference, followed by Chile, Uruguay, Panama, Now, the Dominican Republic is still the most vulnerable country to industry interference in our region. The industry is using a number of tactics. For example, they supply the economic support, also corporate social responsibility activities, also fiscal incentives, and they're also working heavily in the health sector. Some of these countries, like I said, receive incentives of a fiscal nature, which is against the draft or the text in 5.3. In many cases, the industry plays a role in the decision-making process, in the consultation process, and in some cases, they actually manage to pass laws that favor the tobacco industry. 10 countries have actually backtracked. Colombia, Guatemala, for example, there's been high interference by the industry. The industry continues to use corporate social responsibility to improve their image and to obtain political access. Some countries are even granted fiscal incentives and they take part in official events. Donations and incentives are often the entryway, and that is the case for Bolivia, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador. We identify these types of activities across all these countries. Now, there are good regulation examples as well. For example, in the case of Mexico, lack of transparency remains a critical point in multiple countries. There are no norms to regulate lobbying, for example, or that require that interactions with the industry be reported. There's also conflict of interest in countries like Bolivia, the Dominican Republic, and when there's no accountability mechanism in place, the industry's interaction often remains hidden. Many countries have made progress and actually put in place codes of conduct and protocols for interaction, showing that it is indeed possible to protect the public policies in place. Now, despite these cases, we're seeing significant advancement in countries like Peru and Mexico. So this shows that it is indeed possible to put in place preventive measures and have them be successful. Countries like Brazil and Panama have strengthened their integrity mechanisms. These experiences show us that the recommendations under Article 5.3 are indeed possible and can be effective. Now, to turn this trend around, we will need full-fledged action, integrated action across government sectors. This is not the exclusive responsibility of the ministries of health. We also need to get other sectors, other government sectors involved, as well as civil society. We need joint action. We need to educate, regulate, oversee, and cooperate with one another. Without transparency, this interference will continue to harm public health policy. This is why the the institutions behind this index are focusing on strengthening governance, cooperation, and collaboration. By implementing these measures, we will be able to reduce the industry's influence and move forward towards more full-fledged, integrated, and sustainable policies going forward. So, as a conclusion, the regional index for 2025 shows us that interference continues to be a threat, but there are examples where countries have made progress and have made new commitments. Tobacco control is not just a health issue, but rather one of government integrity. Protecting public policy requires constant surveillance, constant watchfulness. We would like to thank all of our regional cooperators and all the countries that have supported us. A total of 19 countries are part of this index. So thank you so much for your commitment. And we will continue to work diligently to strengthen Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention. Please visit our website to download this material, we also have other tools with examples from multiple countries that will help you implement these measures effectively. Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura, for your illustrative, comprehensive presentation. Now, like you said, I will be posting the link to it here in the chat box. And by the time we're done with the press conference, you will be able to visit that link and download all the material in the chat. We would also like to thank all the collaborators from 19 different countries. This was all been structured and based on publicly available information that 19 countries have been collecting from January 2023 to April 2025. That was our cutoff date. We've actually included that definition in the transition framework that we will be discussing during the second part of our press conference. We've actually, this cutoff date was a few months ago, and we've been able to reduce or curb industry interference. Our efforts to reduce interference under Articles 5.3 have been absolutely crucial, and this is going to be the focus of the next few speeches by the officials we'll have next. So let's begin our round of discussions. We'll begin with our panelist from Brazil. Vera Luisa da Costa Silva is her name. She's the Executive Secretary of the National Commission in charge of implementing the Framework Convention for Tobacco Control in Brazil. So, without further ado, I'll give the floor to Vera in just a few seconds. She's been playing a very important role. We wouldn't have time to go through your entire history in public policy making and in defense of our framework convention. So we'll be brief. It's a pleasure to have you with us. So Vera's presentation will actually be in Portuguese. So if you'd like to use simultaneous translation, please feel free to do so. Once again, this event is being interpreted into Portuguese, English, and Spanish. So feel free to select your preferred audio channel by clicking on the interpretation button in the bottom of your screen. Thank you so much, Dr. Vera, for joining us. The question we have for you is as follows. The convention, framework convention for applying 5.3 makes reference to the need to avoiding conflicts of interest between public officials, public servants, especially recommendation 4.8, which states that the parties should not allow any people hired by the tobacco industry to be a part of any government agencies. Tobacco control policies or public health policies need to be implemented, and they cannot be a part of that if there's a conflict of interest. So what can you tell us about the advancements, the progress that Brazil has made vis-a-vis the implementation of this particular recommendation? Hello, good morning, buenos dias, bom dia. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today at this launch. This is the fourth edition of the Tobacco Industry's Interference Index, and I'd like to begin by thanking Kai and GGTC for the invitation and for this publication. I believe this is a very important publication. It will help us truly implement the Framework Convention and its protocols. In Brazil, I'd like to thank ACT, Promotion of Health, and the observatory that monitors all of these strategies by the tobacco industry. Also, Fiocruz for the work they've done in collecting information from across the country. I'd like to say that CONIC, with support from its executive secretariat, has been deeply involved in this process to identify and also to guide CONIC members and civil servants, generally speaking, in the country's executive branch on the fact that they should not allow interference by the tobacco industry. As you may know, this is a huge country. It's also a tobacco producer and exporter, and the tobacco industry actually implements all known strategies to try and interfere with Brazil's public policies. Now, what has CONIC been doing about that? First, we passed a declaration to discontinue the informative sessions at the COP with the participation of the tobacco industry. We're also limiting the contact to informal opportunities by heads of delegation, and whenever necessary, they should be called in merely to inform Brazilian authorities when they're called in. We also developed a number of ethical considerations by using the conflict of interest form and applying it to all CONIC members. We're also updating and applying our internal set of rules, which also addresses this very issue. Additionally, at CONICI, we've approved a conduct protocol for interacting with the tobacco industry. Now, as an example, we've drawn from the Canadian decision tree for public agents or public officials that interact with representatives from the tobacco industry. We were very happy this week when when an ordinance was published by the Brazilian IRS, which establishes a protocol to be followed by the Brazilian IRS when dealing with any requests by those representing the tobacco industry. That is truly a turnkey moment for the Brazilian government because we're moving away from the health sector and now we're getting the economic sector involved as well in the form of the Ministry of Finance. They will be helping us develop these protocols for interaction. We also work together with Fiocruz, with support from PAHO and from Vital Strategies, to provide a capacity building session for CONIC about the interference of the tobacco industry. Now, there are still challenges in the executive branch vis-à-vis agriculture, councils to fight piracy. In the legislative branch, we also have the group of members of parliament that focus on the tobacco industry, and that's a big problem because they do a lot of lobbying. Their lobbying is actually formulated by the tobacco industry. In the judiciary branch, in the implementation of the preliminary protocol to fight the illicit trade, there's a big problem because tobacco companies are often owing money and they're closed down by the IRS, but then the judiciary branch or the courts open the back up again. And they continue to owe money to the federal government and they continue to engage in piracy and counterfeiting of tobacco products. So we need to cast a wider gaze and work alongside all three branches of government, not just the executive, but also the legislative and judiciary branches. So now that we've come to a conduct of protocol for the tobacco industry, there's been a reaction by the Brazilian IRS and by the Ministry of Finance. They've put together an interaction protocol specifically for auditors and heads of police working for the Brazilian Revenue Service. So thank you so much. This is an increasingly aggressive industry, so the more headway we can make in terms of putting in place measures to control tobacco use, the more the industry itself becomes aggressive and tries to bring in even more revenue. Thank you for the opportunity. We're here to serve. We're very grateful, Daniel, to you and to Laura for your unwavering support to make the lives of those in the tobacco industry harder as time goes by. Thank you. Thank you so much, Vera. Thank you for your participation. So, just so that the general public can understand what we're talking about in the Brazilian presentation, This framework convention for tobacco control has been adopted internationally for public health. There is an inconceivable conflict between public policies to control tobacco and other policies. This particular instrument was put in place in 2003 and it went into effect in 2005. So this year we're celebrating 20 years of anniversary. As for this instrument, much like any other international instrument, in 2008, guidelines have gone into effect to implement this particular article in addition to other measures. Much of this has already been mentioned here, and there have also been a number of advancements and achievements, as Dr. Vera said. In Brazil, we have a number of directives, which are basically a set of 7 recommendations. Our participants here today are actually voicing their opinion about some of them because we're going to be discussing them in detail. Like Laura Salgado said, they're part of our methodology that really structures the way the interference index is structured at the regional and global levels. That said, we've been working on conflict of interest and developing new tools about that for government officials. There have been a number of challenges, but also great progress. Brazil has shared its opinion. But now we're going to amplify this conversation by bringing in our next speaker from Ecuador. This is the Deputy Minister of Health and Governance, Dr. Bernardo Danquera, but unfortunately he was unable to attend today's meeting. But we have a representative from that institution, Pablo Ana Luisa, a psychologist, and also the National Director in charge of tobacco strategies and prevention for non-communicable diseases. He's looking closely into the social and economic effect of these drugs. His participation is most welcome here at this press conference. So I pose pretty much the same question as we did for Dr. Vera Luisa. Our question has to do with recommendation 4 under the guidelines. So let me ask that question right now. Once again, this recommendation states that we need to avoid conflict of interest involving public officials, public employees. That's more specifically recommendation 4.9. It states that the party should not nominate or designate anyone that's part of the tobacco industry or anyone working to advance the interests of the tobacco industry. Those should not be a part of the Conference of the Parties or any of other agencies that focus on compliance. So with that in mind, what can you tell us? What progress has Ecuador been making and what challenges has it faced? Thank you, Daniel, for the invitation. Thank you for your question. For Ecuador and for our Ministry of Public Health, we are the National Health Agency and the focal point for the Tobacco Control Framework Convention. So recommendation 4.9 of Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention has been consolidating over the years into a priority. So we want to have that inform in a fully fledged fashion our health policy. Now, the results of the interference index for our country, well, we ranked 68, right? We got 68 points. This shows that we've made progress in terms of transparency and prevention, but it also shows that we need to continue our work to open up spaces that can be consolidated because we need to fight these interferences. And this may hamper the consolidation of public policies in the health sector. So with that in mind, Ecuador since the COP9 conference has been at the forefront of this maximization of transparency. We've actually hired the countries that are part of the Framework Convention for the Protocol to voluntarily present their own conflict of interest declarations. This practice was actually enshrined by Ecuador. We're looking to increase trust across the member states and also put in place a transparency protocol in all international spaces where decisions are made. Another important piece of progress that we've made was general approval of the organic mental health law, which has recently been sanctioned. Article 12 states that mental health policies in general should be protected by the state from any kind of interference, from any kind of industry that may be connected to the topic at hand. So it's about directly supporting the implementation of Article 5.3 by ensuring that all mental health policies, and by the way, in this case, I'm referring to the organic law on mental health, so that they can be included as part of the tobacco control norm. And this has to happen free of any conflict of interest. However, we recognize that we still face a number of challenges. There are many issues we still must address. Now, we are aware of what we've been doing as part of the state's commitment to maximize transparency and strengthen health governance. In our case, this is based on ethical principles as well as on evidence and transparency, of course. So, in a nutshell, Ecuador has consolidated a robust legal framework, a political framework, which is a part of the principles that are included in the principles of the organic mental health law. So, we're protecting ourselves from interference by the tobacco industry. So, in closing, I'd like to thank you all for being here and congratulate you, well, for having this kind of space. This will help us learn more about the experiences of other countries so that we can be better aligned and ensure proper governance in public health. Thank you, Paulo. Thank you. Some elements that you've mentioned have been considered and included in this index. This goes well hand in hand with what Dr. Vera Luisa was saying earlier about the work done in Brazil. So there's leadership happening in Ecuador, if I understood properly. Much has been done to strengthen the implementation of Article 5.3. Now, these meetings that we've been discussing, this includes the Conference of the Parties and the fourth meeting of the Conference of the Parties under the protocol that will be taking place in Geneva from the 17th to the 27th of November. This entire topic about the eighth Conference of the Parties is about the maximization of transparency and the improvement of these delegations so that they can be protected against industry interference. Not just to strengthen the meeting, that's actually crucial, but it's one of the indicators used by the index as its methodological structure or framework. It also states that these countries that have documented these changes, out of them, none of the countries that participate in this edition of the index, there's no documentation of any participation with conflicts of interest. So we just wanted to reiterate that point, and we hope that will continue to be the case and will become a natural practice, not just in Latin America, but also all five regions that are part of the WHO. Like you said, there's also the issue of legislation development. Article 5.3 talks about public policy and tobacco control. That goes actually beyond tobacco control because the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control fully applies to all the areas of the government, not just health. So both speakers have been quite clear about that particular point. Okay, with that, we bring this topic to a close. It was about one of the indicators in the index. So let's now move to the next step. To do so, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Sofia Mus from Guatemala. She is a technical assistant working at the Ministry of Public Health and Social Assistance of Guatemala. Much like Laura said, the ways that the industry work, they work in different ways, in many varied ways, and these change over time. One of the things the industry does is try to form strategic partnerships, and in doing so, they'll try to position their commercial interests in those spaces. So the directives for Article 5.3 also provide a recommendation about that particular point. So I'd like to ask you for your thoughts on the matter, Sophia. So once again, let me ask the question. Recommendation 3 of Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention states that it's important to reject any partnerships or non-binding agreements with the tobacco industry. More specifically, Recommendation 3.4 states that the party should not accept, support, or be in line with any kind of assistance or any proposed legislation or policies to control tobacco passed by the tobacco industry or in collaboration with the tobacco industry. That's in a nutshell. Can you tell us about some of the challenges and the progress that Guatemala has been uh, having with that in mind? Hello, good afternoon, good morning to everyone in attendance today. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. I acknowledge the effort of the entire team that's helped to create the Industry Influence Index. You might know that Guatemala is one of the countries that suffers the most influence, especially vis-a-vis public policy making. We have two clear examples. One of the most well-known such examples is from 2019, the San Carlos University, which is a public university in Guatemala. They submitted a proposed law to control the tobacco products. That proposal was widely debated in the health committee. The tobacco industry was in fact asked to participate. And when we looked at the minutes of those meetings, we noticed that they actually allowed the industry to comment on each and every article. That discussion was actually brought to a halt because of industry interference. There's another recent example in 2025. In the beginning of the year, a draft bill was introduced to regulate electronic cigarettes. Now, that was a very lacking proposal. There wasn't much in the way of content. And the members of parliament who submitted that bill, they sat down with the tobacco industry in early 2025 to discuss the bill of law. And we see that kind of thing happen all the time. Progress has been made about that particular topic, however. Now, before anything else, I should tell you that there's a lot of evidence available. This index is very important. When we have discussions with decision makers and with officials, um, we have a lot of evidence available. The second piece of progress we've made in our ministry was the fact that in 2024, the norms were approved for code of conduct and ethical conduct between the ministry and the tobacco industry. And these norms include a chapter devoted to conflicts of interest. The Ministry of Health states that any action, conduct, or position that might jeopardize the fulfillment of rights or anything like that would constitute a conflict of interest because it would actually negatively affect the integrity and the transparency of our ministry. And it also proposes a number of measures to avoid conflict of interest. So that was a great step forward when it comes to that, because now public officials have a tool that they can use to determine any cases of interest, of conflict of interest whenever they're happening, and also a number of preventive measures can be put in place. In 2024, we approved the cancer law, or the attention to cancer law, and we also approved a number of committees and commissions that are going to be operating under that law. The law also creates a mechanism to protect against conflicts of interest. That was a good step in the right direction because we acknowledge the interference of the interests of the industry, but we're also using legislative mechanisms to protect these spaces. In the context of Guatemala, we know that there's no regulation or legislation that protects the process of making policies from interactions between public officials and the industry. So we're using the narrative of democracy that we want to listen to everyone, but there is a need for a norm to be created. I also believe that industry interference means that not everything is recorded or written down. So the situation in Guatemala might actually be worse than we think. We know that the industry is actively involved in policy making, yes, but also, sorry, Sophia seems to be frozen. Okay, Sophia, you're back. So documenting these processes is of the utmost importance. So thank you so much for your efforts so far. We, as the Ministry of Health, we believe that it's important to document all the processes so that civil society can keep an eye and oversee what's going on. That was basically it. Thank you for the invitation, and congratulations for releasing the fourth edition of the index. Thank you, Dr. Sophia, for your participation, for the examples that you've shared with us. Your comments show us that there are many things going on. Sophia mentioned industry interference in public policy making and in the approval of laws. That's another topic mentioned in the Framework Convention to Control Tobacco. All of these instruments, they need to be cross-cutting. In fact, the directives to implement Article 5.3, they're quite explicit when they say that they apply to all three branches of government, executive, legislative, and judiciary. So along those lines, the examples about the protocols enacted by the Ministry of Health that can serve as a guide for other parts of the country, those have all been documented and they're common practice in many countries in the region. It's important to look up these examples in the index. The link is in the chat box. We're also getting a few questions, so keep them coming. Keep your questions coming. Make sure you use the question and answer panel. We'll be writing all of them down. We won't have time to answer them live, at least not in this particular press conference, but we will answer all these questions later on. Now, Ecuador and Brazil have spoken about conflicts involving public officials. Guatemala has recommended the rejection of any partnerships that involve tobacco industry participation. Now we're going to move to yet another recommendation. This is perhaps the most important recommendation in the fourth edition of the index. It has to do with incentives, privileges, and incentives for the tobacco industry. To talk about that, I'd like to welcome Professor Michelle Castillo Trejo. She is the assistant in charge of public policies for tobacco control at the Office of the Undersecretary of Health Policies and Well-being in Mexico. Welcome. Like I said earlier, the directives for Article 5.3 and Recommendation 7 state that it's important not to afford preferential treatment to the tobacco industry, especially with regards to 7.1, which says that the parties should not provide any such privileges or advantages to the tobacco industry. So that said, what has Mexico been doing? What are the challenges and what are the success stories that you've had in your country so far? Thank you so much, Daniel. Good morning, everyone, officials, representatives, and so many others. We're very grateful for this invitation. It's great to see so many colleagues, Mira Lopez Isalde. It's great to see you here. You were also key to putting together this particular version of the indicator. This is a great tool to give more visibility and ascertain the influence of the tobacco policy, the tobacco industry when it comes to anti-tobacco policy. We once again prioritize the population's health much more so than any commercial interest. So our public policies on health, they supersede any economic interests because we want to ensure everyone has the right to good health. So any government interaction should be ethical and free from any conflicts of interest. Mexico is at the forefront of this index because it's got the least amount of interference by the tobacco industry. This shows how committed the officials are in implementing the directives under Article 5.3 of the Framework Convention. These directives protect public policies from undue interference by the industry to make sure that public health is paramount. Recommendation number 7 actually prohibits any preferential treatment given to the industry. So Mexico has put in place uh, initiatives to revoke any such privileges. Now, the national legislation is walking hand in hand with those initiatives by ensuring maximum transparency and maximum accountability in all of our relationships with the industry. However, we're still facing challenges. We've been strengthening our surveillance mechanisms and we've been making updates to our norms to make sure that this recommendation is fully heeded. And we also want to protect the integrity of health policy, thanks to transparency, codes of conduct for civil servants, and constant supervision. Mexico has now become a reference in the region. However, the tobacco industry is always reinventing itself and posing new challenges when it comes to prevention and monitoring alike. Despite our progress, we have faced significant challenges because of the ever more sophisticated tactics used by the industry to influence the government's decisions. This is why we need to step up control, surveillance, and institutional capacity to respond in an effective fashion to these tactics. More specifically, we need to keep strong our political commitment to protect public policies from commercial interests that pose a risk to public health. Progressivity in the right to health requires constant vigilance and constant adaptation to ever-changing tactics by the industry. We need to make sure these policies are untouched by the industry. Now, the role of observers is absolutely paramount, especially those that are registered with the Framework Convention, and they do a lot of important monitoring work. These organizations are key in achieving the convention's objectives. They contribute to supervision. They also blow the whistle on any interference. The interference by the industry is constant. Reducing surveillance will allow corporate interests to prevail in public life, as the numbers show us. This is why governments should have the necessary resources to monitor, document, and fight these interferences. Now, Framework Convention 4 in Articles 20 and 21 states that international cooperation is crucial. These articles touch upon scientific, technical cooperation as well as the exchange of information meant to strengthen regional response to industry interference. The regional index will also allow us to gauge the progress and also identify areas where we need to improve and step up collaboration across government, civil society, and international organizations to protect the population from the damage and the harm posed by tobacco. Now, on behalf of our Secretariat, I'd like to reiterate Mexico's commitment to remaining steadfast in its promotion of Article 5.3 and also to strengthen our strategies that prioritize protecting people's health. Thank you so much for the invitation. Congratulations, everyone in the region, for the efforts that you've put in place. We're working hard to avoid interference from the tobacco industry. Okay, thank you so much, Professor Trejo. It was great to have you. Now, the Tobacco Control Framework Convention has, in addition to 5.3, also has other uh, articles and other guidelines. In other presentations, we've actually mentioned the progress that was been made. There's also cooperation by other parts of the state, by other branches. We've spoken about international cooperation. Now we want the parties to complement one another via international cooperation, and we see that quite clearly in the index. We can consult this joint information in our index. There's also a number of additional recommendations that have to be put in place by all the parties to strengthen the implementation of all the recommendations. Now, we would like to welcome our final speaker, Dr. Reina Roa. She's the focal point for the Framework Convention for Tobacco Control at the Panamanian Ministry of Health. She has a lot of experience in public health, and it's an honor to have you with us at this press conference. Now, the question we've got here for you has to do with what else we can do at the state level, especially in terms of raising awareness about the nature of addiction and how it could affect people's health. I'm referring to tobacco products. So in addition to that, the directives mention how important it is to raise awareness in the population about the harm that these products can cause. Recommendation 1 states that Article 12 under the convention states that the parties should educate the government officials, the officials in all three branches of government about the importance of protecting public policy against interference by the tobacco industry and to let them know about the tactics that the industry uses to interfere with public policy making and public policy implementation. With that in mind, can you tell us about some of the challenges and the progress that Panama has been making when it comes to implementing all of this? Thank you, Daniel. Civil society has been working to develop this indicator for many years, and we think that it makes the work easier. It really makes it easier for all the parties to assess what kind of interference is happening to make sure we know if we're making progress in our measures to limit industry interference. And I use the word limit because I believe it's next to impossible to fully eliminate interference by the industry. With every year, the industry comes up with even new strategies that compound those that already exist. The idea or the idea here is to minimize the impact of these measures and to protect any future legislative initiatives from this influence so that we can continue to implement the fourth edition of the Framework Convention and also do other things to avoid uh, more influence by the tobacco sector. Now, you've asked us about what we've been doing with the implementation of Article 12th of the Framework Convention, which is about offering information and educating all the public institutions and civil servants about the issue. For a number of years now, Panama has been doing a lot at the Ministry of Health, yes, but also at the regional level. We've been working to raise the awareness of the population about the importance of tobacco control policies and the need for civil society to take the Framework Convention to heart as its own strategy to improve their well-being and to improve their health levels. We've carried out a number of capacity building activities to promote people's health in an integrated fashion. This has to do with tobacco policy or tobacco control policies. So in addition to all that, I would also like to say that Panama has a 5-year tobacco control plan in place for implementation purposes. That's reviewed every 5 years. And as part of its strategy is the raising of awareness of the public and also raising the awareness of decision makers. By means of regional plans, we conduct capacity building and awareness raising initiatives that include officials from all walks of life and all parts of government, not just the Ministry of Health. We provide information about industry interference. We also work with the National Tobacco Control Commission. This is an integrated commission that has people from the Ministry of Health and from the Research Institute. Part of its mandate is, well, the fact that we will be signing the non-conflict of interest declarations. We also work with the National Commission to implement the protocol, and part of the guidance we provide to the members of the commission, these are people who, by the way, participate in government. So we provide them with guidance about industry interference and about the need to sign these non-conflict of interest documents to ensure the implementation of Article 5.3. Whenever we travel, we go on missions, and we have meetings about the protocol at the Conference of the Parties. Whenever we sign these documents that determine that say that we don't engage in any conflict of interest, those need to be signed periodically to make sure we get a recent snapshot of the situation. About the means of communication, well, whenever we carry out one of these interventions, we also emphasize the fact that in its daily work, the industry is using certain strategies that are geared towards minimizing the effects of our tobacco control policies. And they also want to limit the advances we make in implementing new measures. We have a website called Panama Libre de Tobacco or Panama Free from Tobacco, which mentions interference by the industry and a few litigations that we've had to go through at the national level so as to protect some of the clauses that we've previously approved. Now, I mention litigation because this is a constant source of learning. We also drew ties to certain decisions in litigations that have taken place in Uruguay and Australia about the packaging of these products. So it really is important to share this information with society. We've actually run into a number of challenges, one of which is access. The members of parliament have actually been working on this. We have this issue of legislative transparency, which requires that the Assembly of Parliament interacts with all the parties. I think someone's mentioned this already. I think Ecuador mentioned something along those lines. This is a very sensitive issue that we've been facing. Another issue is the fact that the electoral law has prohibited funds from being provided by certain financial institutions, but we were unable to include a prohibition against receiving funding from the tobacco industry in our electoral campaign. This is one of the challenges we face that curtail what we've been doing in implementing Article 5.3, which is of the utmost importance in our fight against the effects of tobacco. Now, this process is also leading into a number of conflicts in social networks. Social networks are now issuing fake news about the impact of tobacco control policies. So these areas, we need to continue to focus on them. Like we said, we think that industry interference will continue to be stronger over time. Vera, in fact, mentioned that in her presentation about the Brazilian experience. That is what I had for you. I think we're running out of time, so I'll end my presentation now. Thank you so much, Daniel, Laura, and the entire civil society team, because you're fighting the interference by the tobacco industry day in and day out. Thank you so much, Dr. Roa. You've actually touched on a lot of elements that really complemented what we've said so far. I also wanted to reiterate the fact that many of these actions limit interference by the industry. They could also be tools to do away with this interference altogether. Now, I wanted to reiterate the purpose of this index. Now, I want to bring this to a close because we're behind schedule, but the index is actually a report conducted by or compiled by civil society based on open data on the issue. There have been many actions, and there's a call for all the countries that are part of the Framework Convention, and even those that are not, can implement these recommendations as an additional tool, in addition to what Panama has done on the website. We also have resources from ministries of health from across the board. We have information from court cases, litigations, and other sources. The industry is always trying to get in the way of implementing the Framework Convention. Now that we're celebrating its 28th anniversary, the index tries to reiterate the importance of implementing Article 5.3 as the backbone of this conversation. Also, with us is corporate accountability. We're here working together. So I'd like to thank all the 19 people who collaborated to this document. It's important that everything in this article can be implemented properly and adequately. I would also like to thank all of our colleagues, Laura, Jaime, and everyone in the observatory, the entire team who's been a part of this. The link will be shared in the chat box, and the document will be released after this press conference. We'll also be submitting complimentary material. On Tuesday, November 11th, we will be releasing the Global Index on Interference. We'll be sharing those details after the press conference. This regional index will actually help us put together this regional index. It includes the other 4 or 5 regions. We haven't really encompassed all 6 WHO regions, but we've come to include 6 separate countries. So that has been great. We're trying to effectively implement Article 5.3. Now I'm about to close the meeting, but before I do, I'd like to give the floor back to Laura to see if she would like to say anything else before we close. Otherwise, we'll close right now. Okay, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We're grateful to all the participants, to the speakers, Dr. Vera Luisa, Dr. Sophia, Professor Michel Casilia, Rena Roa. Your input was absolutely crucial to this launch. We're grateful to all the people who collaborated with the index, and Mr. Justa, who has made the YouTube channel available to us. We're grateful to Brazil for allowing this event to be interpreted. Thank you so much, and we'll keep in touch. See you next time.